Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. This is another series of presentations for Non-Linear Existentialism. The title is Temporal Entropy Resistance. We'll be covering topics such as entropy, uncertainty, and teleology. What we're going to be doing with this presentation is just show you briefly the table of contents. But we're going to be starting off with this scenario. This scenario, I think, is the best way to describe temporal entropy resistance. And throughout the presentation, I might make a few comments. And at the end, just do a little bit of a summation. I think most of the presentation is written on the screen and can be understood from that. So I'll just begin with reading the scenario. There are a collection of elements in an environment. Over time, due to the interactions with the environment in the form of exchanges of energy, the elements coalesce into a number of different objects. The temperature of one of these objects, object A, changes when the ambient temperature changes. This is in contrast to object B that maintains its temperature through a range of changes in the temperature in the environment. The question I'd put to you is, can object B exist even though it apparently contravenes the second law of thermodynamics? The reason I'm starting off with this one is that I think this is the best way as to describe the interaction and the purpose and the underlying themes of entropy, and how it's going to relate to the other topics of nonlinear existentialism. This is being brought in along with the previous presentation, specifically the one just before that was describing energy, existence, metaphysics, and the like. It's important to see how nonlinear existentialism describes the systems that interact with the nervous system, and as well how it explains certain things on different levels. Whereas it can be understood from a physics level, it can be understood certainly from philosophical, psychological, and the like. So I will just push the various slides forward, and you can determine your rate for yourself. And again, I'll just make some comments as we go along if it's necessary. Thank you. Key point in this slide is not the Wikipedia definition, other ones that I find, but the basic idea that the heat energy of all items within a system will eventually be zero, will be equal. So that's a basic idea of entropy, is going towards an average. Key in this one is the idea that this system works during the lifetime of the organism, which is in this case a person, and while they're alive they're temporal beings, and you can see the importance of temporal as it pertains to time and pacing of time at a certain frequency later on in this presentation. For this one, the simple answer is going to be thermal regulation. And while it is important, and of course it does regulate heat, and if we're talking about entropy, that's a very important item to consider. I think it should be more emphasis should be put on the primary complex answer, which is temporal entropy resistance, because most systems, all systems within heat generating, heat maintaining systems such as ourselves, basically are temporal entropy resisting, and that would also include the central nervous system. And in some ways it's key because it interrelates and controls most of these systems. So temporal entropy resistance, the process by which a highly adaptive organism such as a human being is able to temporarily overcome thermal equalization or entropy by way of the nonlinear and uncertain aspects of these processes. This is going to be a tie-in with other nonlinear existentialistic theories and articles that I presented beforehand, because it certainly is nonlinear and it certainly is uncertain or unpredictable. Each of these steps builds upon the other one and meets certain considerations and minimal standards that, when you discuss these topics, have to be met. The idea here is that if an object's in an environment, and the object itself, of course, that the interaction between the environment, the internal environment of the object, and the external environment of the environment, when they interact, that interaction can decrease the order of the object, because the external order of the environment can be considered disorder for the object. Nonlinear in this way, again, is the idea of what frame of reference you have. The environment is going to have a certain way of doing or carrying out or processing, and if there's an object within that system that doesn't appear to be carrying out in the same way, it's going to be considered nonlinear. An example I gave before was the idea of heat. If it maintains the same heat as the environment, it's going to seem linear to the environment. If it does not, it's going to seem nonlinear. It's very important with this one is to consider nonlinear and unpredictable or uncertain as being two different phenomena. I've already discussed nonlinear. Unpredictable basically is that you can have it being nonlinear to the environment but linear to itself. So therefore, if it's linear to itself and you put it into different circumstances, and that linearity is supposed to be maintaining a certain heat, as I mentioned before, then it will be predictable. So therefore, the systems can be nonlinear to the environment, but it can be predictable. This is just going over the idea of time also being considered another nonlinear element, because whereas the environment has many different paces, cadences, ourselves has the perception of time, whereas the information coming into us or perceived by us occurs in the same frequency. This is the idea of us being nonlinear as well as uncertain. Highly evolved organisms, such as humans, are able to temporarily resist entropy by virtue of being nonlinear and having uncertainty in respect to the environment. Nonlinearity is in respect to the environment allows for specific physiological states to be maintained by the organism. These are ones that are necessary in order to survive. So once survival is the basic structure, organisms, systems are maintained, the uncertainty which is on top of it, and in this case uncertainty is going to be pertaining to the way the patterns in the cerebral cortex are arranged, not so much as on the primary, which is the primary sensory. What's going to be happening is you have the primary sensory and you have permutations of the primary sensory, how they relate to each other, the patterns, and as mentioned before also how much stimulation that they have and how much these patterns and stimulation compare to the stimulation, the background levels of excitation in the cerebral cortex, how they relate to each other. And again, this is very important to have it uncertain so as to maximize the optimization of energy that each one of these patterns can have. So what I'm using here, and also calling it nonlinear macroscopic entropy, is the idea of information theory. A lot of times when you talk microscopic, you're going to get into the idea of quantum theory, chaos, and such. But I want to show, as I did in the original paper of this was the forefather of nonlinear existentialism, was an amplified macroscopic probability, but that's going to be for a organic system. This idea also pertains to information theory, and I'll just read out what I found in the subject. Entropy, in a information sense, is a measure of uncertainty. A coin flip has a 50-50 chance of being heads or tails. Entropy is at its maximum in this state. If a variable or noise is added to the system with the coin flip, and it favors heads occurring over tails, then there's no longer a 50-50 chance, because this noise favors one of the events and uncertainty decreases. This is going to be just an overview again of the building towards having temporal binding, which is frequency modulation, and the idea of quantity, which is going to be going to be primary patterns, and quality, which is going to be amplitude modulation. Again, this is the idea of having patterns, having new patterns being produced in the primary patterns, primary sensory and motor patterns. And what happens is that based on optimization of energy, the weights between these patterns that connect them can change, and then so new patterns can be formed all based on the old ones, and also the amount of excitation that each gives off and how that compares to background levels of excitation. So again, as I mentioned, Amplified Macroscopic Probability was the first paper that gave forth nonlinear existentialism, and I'll just read out this statement. In a similar way, the fluctuations that are created in the inorganic information stream by the coin flip are also created by temporal entropy resistance in the organic nervous system by continually and incrementally. Both these are very important because the probability that is produced like a coin flip isn't a tremendous amount at the beginning. It's just incremental along. It's continual but incremental, and it's just one on top of another, top of another. So these shifts in probabilities don't happen right away, because if they did, then very important and necessary patterns, very important nonlinear maintenance patterns will be destroyed. So the thing is that the uncertainty, it doesn't happen right away. It requires the system to run for a while internally and cut off a little bit from the external, and that's how you get your personality, that's how you get your value, and that speaks more and more to the quality. Anyway, so by continually incrementally adding internal uncertainty on a small scale, it allows the system to determine which of the patterns produced by such a change has the most variable level of excitation, again the idea of primary needs baseline activity level, and thereby temporarily reduce the effects of entropy on the being. Or put it another way, the process of nonlinearity uncertainty makes it possible for new physiological patterns to be formed in the cerebral cortex by which it and its adjacent structures may become more successful at reducing entropy. Another one, based on this perspective, either form of energy or entropy is disordered to the other. Again, relativity is very important. For the human, while the external energy is necessary for survival, it needs to be controlled, regulated. To do this, internal entropy or disorder is necessary. Subsequently, there is a continuous interaction between these two systems, creating conflict or disorder when they meet. This is an important point also. It could be argued that metaphysical thought and acceptance occur when it is dispassionately realized by a person that the final outcome of this interaction is that external disorder will prevail. And teleology in that subject. Therefore, temporal entropy resistance is the final goal or teleological outcome of objects that can experience and be altered by high rates of change, such as ourselves, which is different from an organic and inorganic. Organic can, because of its elements, what it constitutes, can react or altered by change, whereas a rock, you need a tremendous amount of force, and it gets altered, but it cannot grow change because of that alteration. Anyway, back to this statement. For human beings, since temporal entropy resistance is an abstract concept and can come in many psychological and physiological forms depending on the level and locus of the uncertainty, for most people, the acquiring of specific patterns becomes the goal, and at best realized in some people as residual incongruency, becoming less until it reaches zero. So, basically, brought in the idea of temporal entropy resistance just to show that it works in another level. Sometimes it's accused when people talk about a theoretical construct, such as in this case would be theoretical neurophysiology. It is argued that it's good in that field, but it's too subjective, and the necessity of these presentations as they go along is to show it is objective. So you go first objective and show how the subjective occurs. You should not go subjective, which I've shown I think in another presentation, subjective being quality, and using that as the means to argue a point, because it does fall down. Different systems usurp other systems. If you can go to something that is believed to be the fundamental or basic level, you allow it to go towards abstractions. But if you go from an abstract point of view, being philosophy, and backtrack, there's going to be too much personal noise, too much speculation and such. So that's again why these last two presentations have been given, just again to try to be more definitive and to show how the human state is not unique. It's towards more higher adaptation because in environments and such there is certainly a subjective level, but the subjective level is purely built upon objective legs. So if you want to check the other papers in the series or other presentations, please go on YouTube or check the site of cherriesoflife.com. All the papers are there, and any discussions you wish to have, I'd be more than welcome to discuss them with you. Thank you very much. Take care.